Hello and welcome to day two of the international conference being organized by Inspirare Arts Foundation in collaboration with the OUCIS, Hyderabad, Alliance Francaise du Bengal, and Progetto Migra. We are at our second plenary session of the international conference, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Ari Gautier and Irina VIKYRCHAK to the show. Ari is a wonderful francophone writer who has committed himself to the cause of Pondicherry and obviously making francophone subcontinental literature more visible to the world. Ari was born in Madagascar, uh, but spent his early childhood and then, of course, in his youth, he shuttled between Paris and Pondicherry before finally settling in Oslo, where he's joining us this afternoon, this morning. Irina, of course, has been a poet, a cultural manager, and a cultural commentator as well. She has been uh, working with the Nobel laureate Olga Tokarczuk, the Polish writer, for considerable period of time, and she's now in Calcutta or Kolkata as we call it now. But
Mhm.
a large part of her mind and consciousness and being is still with her countrymen and countrywomen right now in the Ukraine and what they are going through at the moment. So our I titled, tried to play with the title actually. Is Thin Eye Verity, Kiev Verity. So conversations across blood, brine, and the blight of memory. Uh, we will have conversations. I don't know if there's going to be blood, brine, and light of memory, all of it in one show, in 1 hour. But we'll try, certainly try. I would begin with Ari. Welcome to the show, Ari. Thank you so much for supporting Inspirare and being a part of this plenary. Uh, Ari, I will let you talk about what a thinna is. For a large part of our audience, the word thinna is a little new word. Ari has written three novels. Thinna is his second novel, I think. Nocturne Pondicherry is his collection of short stories, and of course, then we have the Secrets of Lakshmi. What is it? In
Le
French,
Kama Sutra de Lakshmi,
yeah.
and it's in
So,
English, it will be the Secret Diary of Lakshmi.
Secret Diary of Lakshmi. So again, I used the thin eye concept because Ari and Ananya Jahana Kabir, they have also formed uh, quite lately a wonderful platform, a cultural platform, which they have called uh, Le Thin Eye Creole. Uh, we will come to that later a little bit, but I would let Ari elaborate on this very idea of the thin eye as the site where migratory stories come to roost. The stories about migration and migratory stories, they can all come to roost. This very idea of how the thin eye came into being, not just the novel but the larger idea in a migratory migrant diasporic context. Ari, could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, thanks, Debashish. Thanks for having us, having me, sorry. And then, Irina, good afternoon, and my deepest sympathy
Good
for
afternoon.
what's happening in your country. So it's important to highlight uh, this sensitive issue. So when it comes to Tinai, as you rightly said, Devashish, it's my second novel called Le Tinai in French, which has been translated into English by Blake Smith. The Tinai. The Tinai is actually an architectural element of the Tamil traditional houses. Is there some sound reverberating? I think so.
Yeah, is sound all right?
Yeah, if I heard something something strange,
No, no,
but
it's
never
fine.
mind.
It's fine.
I'm
I
good.
hear you well.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
good.
okay, okay, perfect.
So it's an outside veranda which is attached to the facade of traditional Tamil houses, and normally it's a space uh, which makes the difference between the outer world and the inside world. but it's also a space where people from the family would sit during the day, or mostly in the evening, because those days there was no TV, there was only radios, but there was no TV. So people will sit and chit chat, talking to their kids, telling stories, and sometimes it's also used for welcoming guests. But if they are not kind of very close guests, they'll be only receiving on the Chennai and then send them off. The closest guest will enter the house. So this is kind of very interesting space of negotiation and also exchange. And then again, the other use of the Chennai is for the uh, passerbys. So when it's really warm, hot, the person is tired, he could just sit on the Chennai for a while, take a rest, and then proceed for wherever he was going and whatever he was doing. So I find it very interesting to tell the story of Pondicherry through this Chennai, which is a very interesting space. But at the same time, it's also a disappearing space because the modern urban structure doesn't allow anymore this kind of Chennais because people are more and more interested to make money. So the old houses are taken down and build a new kind of building with apartments where they can, because also the family structure has changed. So slowly, this kind of traditional houses are changing, and the Chennai is one element which is totally changing, which is on one way it's sad, but at the same time, one has to take see the reality in a very cynical way, because the Chennai, however nice it looks like, it's a nice concept as also its own violence. So that's why I always make sure that I don't want to romanticize the Chennai in such a way, in the kind of very nostalgic or something lost, because Chennai also has this caste structure, the gender structure. So one has to be very, very careful when we talk about Chennai. I'm not here to romanticize the Chennai. I'm here to tell the story of Pondicherry, history of Pondicherry through this this space. So while doing that, it was interesting also to incorporate in the Chennai a Creole character, which is another. It's a community from Pondicherry, uh, a mix of between European and Indian. So this community was totally neglected in any kind of studies or even any literary work. They never appeared anywhere. Nobody has done any studies. The only one lady, my former English professor, Madame Louis Tirwanjan, she has made a PhD on the Les Descendants de Créole Pondicherry, which is a decent thesis, I would say. But other than that, it's a kind of totally unknown community. So I want to bring back this community into the into certain visibility through my novel, and that's what got the attention of my collaboratrice Ananya Jana Kabir. I'm sure she's watching it. Hi, Ananya. And so she found it because she was working on a project or on a concept of Creole Indias, how creolization also uh, happens in India. It's not only in the Caribbean or in the Indian Ocean or this old plantation culture, but also inside India, there is a form of creolization which is totally unknown. So she was looking for element which she already started working uh, uh, in Goa, but she was looking for other element. So it was interesting that she got to know my book, and then she found out this Creole community, and so that is how we got in touch, we got in contact, and we started our common project with Tine Creole, where again is how to creolize the world. So from a book to a cultural element, and the cultural element becomes also a concept, a way of thinking. Uh, I would even say a philosophy.
Uh, that's a wonderful and stirring beginning. I mean, the way in which you set it out all out. Ari, I just wanted to know, what about this very idea of semi-coloniality, if I could put it this way, that we talk about portraying the history of Pondicherry, but does it always come down to the bare bone of language always? Because how do you narrate the history of Pondicherry in French, in pristine French, if I could put it that way, without any inflections, any pressures of that history, of that rather checkered history, not affecting you at the level of language as a writer, because that's what we play with, right? Language. But whatever effect, whatever pressure, whatever cast of history comes upon us appears through language. So how is your language affected? How does your language hold up? How does your French hold up? Or do you do some other things with your French? What tricks do you do with language?
That's a very interesting question, Debashish, because my first novel, Kanya Sutra Lakshmi, again, it's also the backdrop. Again, it's a historical backdrop of how. First of all, one has to know that the Pondicherry history has never been taught in any school. I mean, when I was in Pondicherry, when I was studying the Lycée Français, I always wondered why these Europeans are here, but nobody was able to answer, give me the proper answer why they were there, because it was not a part of the curriculum. It's not part of even the common basic education why these Europeans are in Pondicherry and how they came. So it was always on the back of my mind. He said, because the story, this part of history has not been taught to us, and how to appropriate ourselves, our own history. It's my cheval de bataille, as they say in French. That's my goal, and that's a kind of also rereading history. So there is one set of historians, called company historians. We have a one narrative, sorry, which is very pro-French, pro-colonial, and everything. There has never been any kind of critical uh, uh, critical perspective of this narrative. Some people do now, very recently, but 20 years back, no. So it's interesting that a writer from me, like a historical fiction writer, has to see not only the pro French, but it's also to see the other perspective, the critical perspective, in order to understand both sides and to give intellectually honest book. That I'm very committed. It's not, I'm not only taking one side of saying colonialism was bad, but you need to. It's a very complex. It's not a binary way of understanding history. So that is, it's kind of complex. So you need to make it take different elements in order to understand and rewrite history. So that's what I'm doing. So while doing this, I understood that the language I'm going to use, because I was born French, my mother tongue is French. But then again, I lived in a Tamil surrounding. In Pondicherry, there was my neighbors also my Tamils. So it's actually, we live like an island, you see. In my house was, we only speak French, and we school, we only speak French. But when you get back home, you're all surrounded, people surrounding you, family and neighbors, you only speak Tamil. So already you are bilingual. And on top of that, because Pondicherry with this imperial connection, there were people from Vietnam, people from Tahiti, people from Nouvelle Caledonie, so and so, and Senegal and everything. So it became a very cosmopolitan space where language, they mix also. Inside that, there's also Telugu people, Gujaratis because of and then Bengali because of the Aurobindo ashram. So it becomes a tour de Babel itself. So when I started to write, uh, I don't want to write in that, as you say, the pristine French, because it's not me. I'm not a pristine French. I'm a mixed myself. So I cannot write like Victor Hugo or Zola. I need to write the way I feel, and also, in order to reflect the atmosphere, the environment I'm living, I need to mix different languages that it becomes multilingual. So Karneshu Lakshmi, the first, there's a mix of mostly Sanskrit because that is kind of philosophical, religious aspect, spiritual aspect. But Tinnai is deliberately, I put mostly Tamil words because the place I'm talking is Kushikopam is outside the boulevard. It's a fisherman area. So in order to reflect, to have that atmosphere, I need to take that vocabulary from the fishermen and the people who live in very Dalit people. So Dalit people don't, I mean, that area, they don't talk elaborate Tamil, neither elaborate Tamil nor elaborate French. So it's a very basic Tamil. So all this need to take, it's a kind of realism in here to make, of course, definitely I could have just written everything just in French, but it was also an act of political act to put Tamil words into that French literature. That's one way you decolonize French literature.
Thank you, Ari. That's a very interesting point that you made. Decolonizing French literature from the inside. You are writing French literature. You are adding to the body of French literature, but you're also changing it ever so slightly, but from the inside, which is very interesting indeed. I would, since you mentioned that there are certain compulsions that the material that you want to handle puts upon you as a writer. There's
Mm.
also a freedom of choice. The word translingual has been used with writers. Even I would qualify in that group because I have an Indian language as my mother tongue, as Bengali, Bangla, but I choose to write in English. So that the choice that you make. So there's this idea of writers who have choices. It's that they're not compelled to write in one language, but they have a choice of languages amongst which one they choose. So, how do you think translingualism works, especially in your case, as you and your experience of critics? I mean, who uh, basically want to read you, pigeonhole you into either a francophone writer or a writer from the Indian subcontinent or any one of these in between categories that they invent. How would you see yourself in the current scenario, especially? You talked about the traveling of language and your own travels back and forth. You talked about the material that even the Dalits, they don't even talk about talk a kind of a pristine Tamil. So
No,
how can I
exactly.
how can my language, which is about their lives or the lives of people over there in that community, how can it be written in something that is pristine Tamil? So you're already shifting between languages. So between Tamil, the pristine Tamil and the Dalit Tamil, the reduction of it, French, a more kind of
And
demotic
then
French.
also, that's what I'm the translingual, what you say. There's also element of Creole language, which is
Exactly.
in the book, because the Creole community, they have the way of speaking that still scholars are are fighting over to find out if that language is Creole or not. You see, and there are two three books which has been written, and even lately, Ananya and I, we wrote two articles about the Creole language in Pondicherry. But she and I, we are proper, we are totally convinced it's a Creole. But technically, the technicality makes that people are still fighting over if it's a proper Creole or not. But I'm not. Me as a writer, I don't pay. I don't care. It's it's not my problem at all. For me, I find it first of all that mixing of several languages, because the Creole community speak the words from Portuguese, from Dutch, German, English, French, and Tamil, and sometimes even North Indian languages. And then added to French, it becomes real Creole. Uh, so in that way, for me, languages, at the same time, I'm very cautious because that I'm both French and Tamil. I say that many times. Both are very strong uh, chauvinism in their own way, and I don't want to fall. in the trap of being that chauvinism of Franco Tamil. So I make sure that my writing neither it becomes too French or neither nor too Tamil. So in my own way, that's the way I creolize my own writing, my adding different languages. Like in the Chennai, there is also Malayalam. Malayalam had nothing to do with Malayalam, but that's how you how you play with words, how you play with your language, how do you play with your writing in order to have a universal reach.
Yeah, thank you, Ari. That's very interesting that you did talk about, or rather, you question the purity of language. I mean, you talked about getting into the trap, and this is where I want to bring in Irina. Sometimes, Irina, everything has its flip sides. Ari was talking about uh, creolization of language as the way to go, as finding your voice, survival, almost the writer's survival, because he is being constantly badgered to be either here or there. Battle lines are drawn on the turf. So you have to be either this side of the line or that side of the line. You cannot be sitting on the fence. So writers are always being taken to the cleaners because of that. In your case, from where you are coming from Ukraine, that is to say, and especially given the conflict, the backdrop of the conflict with Russia, how do you see this plurality, this plural idea of culture, of a wide view, as against the hegemony, or as against the, you might say, almost oligarchy or colonial setup or mentality of an Uber culture, kind of that was there in Russia, and
Mm.
perhaps this is the root of all this conflict. I mean, it's being fought with guns and tanks, but I think it's an ideological problem deep down. Irina.
Yeah, first I would like to thank you, Ari, for giving insights on translingual phenomena and on colonialism, because what I'm going to speak about, and I'm going to speak about the situation in my country, which is beyond comprehension, and I'm going to speak about it in the light of colonialism as well, because the world is used to speak about USSR, as a huge country which fell apart 30 years ago. But in fact, it was the Russian occupation of these countries which were joined in as Soviet republics. And this war in Ukraine, it is in its nature, it is a hybrid war, and it hasn't started on the 24th of February. It has been on and on for 8 years in the east of the country, when the first two regions in Luhansk and Donetsk were occupied, and the peninsula of Crimea was annexed. Before we can speak about the occupation during the time of Soviet Union, but also for centuries, Ukraine has been a very tempting piece of land, with its culture, with its fruitful soil, with its heritage of the Kievan Rus, the state which existed centuries ago with the capital in Kiev. And during all this time, when Ukraine was colonized by Russian Empire, by Russia, by Soviet Union, but let's just call this Moscow, Russia. Ukrainian language, just for example, was prohibited 134 times. But it's since 17th, 18th century only. But it survived. And now, when we see the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, we see that it's not just a war, according to the rules of war, with only military objects involved. It is the culture which is now attacked, not only in the informational space, but also physically. The Russians, they are sending missiles to destroy museums in Ukraine. More than 40 museums have been attacked or destroyed so far, just within 1 month. Like, for example, the museum of Maria Primachenko, the peasant artist of the first half of the 20th century, and it was a small museum in a very small village, very hard to find. And though they found it, and they set a rocket on it, but luckily the paintings were saved by the local people there. It's been now finally, it's only now that we can openly say that Russia has been jealous of Ukrainian culture and history, and we can trying to usurpate lots of literary and cultural treasures and art treasures, not only in physical way, but for example, think about the Russian writers like Nikolai Gogol or Mikhail Bulgakov. Surely you know these names, or Ilfen Petrov. These are the writers who were born in Ukraine, who were coming in Ukraine, who were like Gogol, writing on Ukrainian culture. Because if you think about Gogol's work, these are the stories which take place in Ukrainian village, and they were writing in Russian for many reasons, for historical reasons, also because of this numerous prohibition of Ukrainian language when it was colonized by Russia at certain parts of history. But these are Ukrainian writers writing in Russian. And when we talk about this pluralism of identity, of Ukrainian identity, there is also another observation I had in 2014 when the revolution Maidan started in Kiev to this revolution. We call it revolution, but yes, it was a gathering of millions of people in Kiev, triggered by the tribe of former prime minister to change the European course of Ukraine in other direction. And it evoked numerous protests, and as a result, we got rid of the President Yanukovych, who was faking the results of elections, trying to also to establish the dictatorship in Ukraine, but it did not work with Ukrainian people. And this time it will also not work. We are defending against the second largest army, as Russians claim it, in the world. And I think Ukraine is doing well so far. But what happened in 2014, it evoked the Ukrainian society, and we had lots of national minorities that were living in Ukraine came forth, and with their languages they were speaking, with the culture, with the literature they are creating in these languages, Crimean Tatars, Romanians, Hungarians, Jewish minorities, all kinds of minorities, more than 120 living in Ukraine, showing that, okay, we are, my background is this and this, my ethnic background and this and this, I am a national of this, but I am a Ukrainian citizen. And I think it really changed the face of Ukraine, especially viewed by the West, because part of the hybrid war, it's informational war, it's propaganda, it's manipulations in the informational field, like that Ukraine is a nationalistic country, but it's not. But it's not. And even now we see this lie also in Russian television, while they are dropping bombs on hospitals, on maternity hospitals, on schools. More than 40 educational institutions were destroyed during the recent month. Yesterday, they attacked a geriatric hospital where, very, very old people lived. And at the same time, in Moscow, we see a huge concert on the stadium with about celebration of 8 years of since the annexation of Crimea. And what is going on in Ukraine is pure terrorism, and it's a genocide of Ukrainian people. it hasn't. It has happened before. For example, in 1930s, when there were uprisings in what is the territory of eastern Ukraine now, and to suppress this uprising, Stalin organized the largest famine in history of humankind, called Holodomor, when millions and millions of people died with the most horrible deaths from famine. And this is what the Russians are doing now in the cities they occupied. They are creating artificial deficit, artificial famine to the civil population, and and this is horrible. But what is there is another discussion. You can stop me or correct me with your questions if you want me to go other direction. But there is just so much in me that I want to share. There was a big discussion in the circles of Ukrainian intellectuals and culture people during these weeks on whether we should boycott the Russian colleagues and Russian culture or not. The decision, the collective decision which was taken, it was to boycott the Russian culture because it has been used as a shield to hide all these atrocities that is done by the country, by the government. So I don't know if I answered your questions, or maybe there is something you would like me to talk to go deeper.
IRYNA, I'm sorry, there was some technical glitch on my side. The net was not there, but could you just repeat the last part of what you said? I just missed that. We just missed that on the show.
Yes, I said that the
about
Russian culture,
the museum in the village. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the museums, the cultural institutions are under attack, and I'm not even saying that the artists are being physically killed. That I'm also a member of PEN Ukraine, and we are all in contact during all this time, and all the writers, they are doing something. Most of them are volunteering. Some of them got stuck in the besieged towns and cities and were trying to get out, but some of them, like Andrei Kurkov, for example, are commenting to the international media on what is going on in the country. But this is the time when when Russian culture should no longer serve as a shield to hide the atrocities behind it. I cannot hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. So as you were saying, IRYNA, this is actually a culture war that is being fought out with tanks. So the missiles are being sent to destroy museums, the heritage of a country. So that's actually the one that is being targeted. So it's not so much as civilians, but it's easy to destroy.
Yes, it's civilians. It's civilians. It's culture. It's history. It's heritage. It's language.
I mean, the body is very weak, isn't it? You can destroy a human body. That's fine. Yeah. It's even more important, it seems, for these oligarchs to destroy the culture. An entire way of thinking. Cultural memory. If you could destroy that, then you have destroyed everything, I guess.
Yes, but what kind of oligarchs are you talking about?
Of course, the Russian ones. I mean, those who think that culture is only singular, not plural. And of course, it's a question of control as well. I think, if I'm not very mistaken, it's a question of control.
Yes, of course, it's a question of control, and I reflect upon this about like there is a small group of people who think of themselves and their ambitions more important that lives of millions and millions of people who had to flee, who lost their homes, like the town of Mariupol. It's been almost 90%. The city is erased from the face of earth. I think about this like this, that this is the question of control and of the scale of self-importance which you put the power. This is actually the power, I guess. Yeah.
Uh, I get back to a point that we were discussing a few days back, Irina. Uh, what do you think about the response of Western Europe? I mean, the more privileged part of Europe, Europe that talks about openness and plurality. Uh, do you think that the almost muted reaction from the major European countries, Western European countries, has something to do with Russian oil and Russian money that is at work in different multinational corporations that work over there? Do you think that Russia felt that this was a divided Europe, that this was a weak Europe, that such an aggression would not be actually countered with the vehemence that it will normally was needed. So they thought that this was an opportune moment to go ahead with their military plans. Do you think that that is the case?
I'm not in the position to speak for politicians, because politicians, they have all the tools to be heard, they have all the tools to speak, and in fact, it's their job to speak. And as a writer and as a poet, I think that my job is to be the voice, to give the voice to those who cannot speak, to those who are threatened, to those who flee for their lives, for those who feel all this pain. I think this is the role of the writer and poet. And of course, since the start of the war in the east of Ukraine for 8 years, we only heard how deeply the West is concerned, because this is the only comments we normally received. But now Russia is openly threatening also Europe and the world, all the civilized world, and it's scary. It's really scary, and I feel like we all feel that Ukraine is fighting for the whole world now, fighting for European values, fighting for democracy, fighting for the right, for the basic human rights, finally. And when I think of Poland, where I lived for last 2 years and a few times before for a year or a few months, I think about Poland as about this space you described, Ari. It's the space for a traveler, for a passersby to sit and have a rest. And Poland has accepted more refugees than any other country so far. Poland has become the nearest safe space for millions of Ukrainians, about 3 million already passed by Poland, and most of them stayed in this country. And I would really, I feel like I would love to hug the whole country with my heart, because this is real solidarity in actions to help civilian society. And I have so many friends there who are accepting Ukrainian, because it's 100% women with children who flee the country. Men stay in Ukraine to fight. Who are accepting my Polish friends, who accepted my Ukrainian friends at their home, who are sharing their children's clothes, because when you are trying to save your life, you don't think about taking your things. You just take what you have on you as clothes, and you take your child and you leave. And there are so many volunteers on both sides of the border, Ukrainian, Western Ukraine, which is relatively safe right now, and also in Polish side, who are helping the civilians to save their life, and also supporting Ukraine in many ways, also with cultural events, with poetry readings. It's very important.
Right, right, indeed. It's a nice conversation because uh, Ari's views and Irina's views, although they come from almost different perspectives, almost, but certain commonalities, certain points of convergence we can already see in terms of what us writers or artists do and how we conceive the world. And Ukraine is sometimes the problem is that sometimes we make the mistake of thinking, oh, it's a faraway country. It's a war on a different front, far away from here, thousands of miles away from here. The immediacy of it, sometimes we don't quite feel. But as writers, I think what Irina also said, and Ari also mentioned at the beginning, it's our task to bring to our readers the fires, the destruction, the actual immediacy, the violence, as if it was right next door. That is our task. If people start thinking it is far away, it is our task to let them know that no, it is not. So if something is threatening a Ukrainian citizen, I'm also threatened. That idea. If something's happened in Pondicherry, I'm also involved in some such similar experience, if not exactly similar, similar experiences. That is what writers, artists are always having to do and should do. I think. Uh, just carrying on from here, Ari, reconnoiter or walking around, it's an interesting part of your novels or writings about Pondicherry, the movement of people, how and which is very interesting, because you create, I've read some excerpts of your novel, but the wonderful situations that you create, it's a fairground, or it's a ceremony that is passing down the street. There's little nuggets that you create of movement, internal movements inside a territory, inside a locality, maybe inside a city, a few lanes here and there. So could you read, if possible? I don't know if you have it right in front of you at this
I
moment.
don't have.
You don't have.
I don't even have a copy of my own book.
That's
Sorry
that's
for
the
that.
that actually takes care of one charge against all writers, that they're very egotistical to the point of not being narcissistic. So you don't have to. So that's great. Anyway, it would be wonderful if you could just talk about it. You have created these situations. Just talk us through the experience of being in Pondicherry, as it comes out in your novel. One or two maybe instances of being in the city, of being in the region, of being in the locality. I'd come with the same question to Irina, because she has a whole, I think, set of poems on Lviv, that city, and how it has affected her in the past. I'll come to that, and I'll ask Irina to read. Irina,
Yeah.
please don't disappoint us and say that you don't have your poems with you now. But Ari, could you
No,
expand
it's
on
yeah, yeah. Debashish, you probably know. Have you been to Pondicherry?
once?
Once.
Once,
Okay.
yeah,
So you know how the town looks like, right?
yeah,
Pondicherry is a divided. It's a divided city. It's not even a city. It's a town, but let's call it a city. It's a divided city by the canal, where it says that's the white city, the white area, and the black area. So that has been there for centuries, and actually it's a Dutch plan that the French implemented, but the Dutch plan already in the 18th century, late 17th, 18th century, they wanted to create that divided city because there was a kind of their problem with water coming inside the town because of the growing urbanization. Uh, they need more and more people starting to come to Pondicherry, so they need to bring the water from outside. So that's one of the reasons that the canal was built, and also it's a kind of segregation because they don't want the indigenous people to live on the beachfront, which we call the white area. However, the colonial mindset that started very late 19th century, early 20th century, saying that this is only a white area, this is only a black area. So because even racism in the colonial system didn't start from the beginning. It's only something which came the late 19th, early 20th century. But before that, we cannot call colonization as a racist system. I'm talking only for French. I don't know about the British. I don't know about other people. But in the French conscious, the racial conscious started only in the 19th century and early 20th century. So when it comes to Pondicherry, it was racially divided, and also the perception of Pondicherry as a common living space. It's very important. People from this part of the town would be afraid to go on the other side, and vice versa. So my novels or my writing is very much putting this topography into perspective, and how this urban space where different community live in one town, but at the same time they are also ghettoized, because each and every caste will have their own street. The Chettiar will live in one street, the Komutis will live in one street, the Muslim will live in one area, the Velaja Christian will live in one area, the Paria Christian will live in one area. So you see how the urban space is made. So it's interesting, in order to understand the psychosocial aspect of Pondicherry, you need to also to understand the streets of Pondicherry, the urban space of Pondicherry. And again, I'm going again to the decolonization process, because for 300 years, people have been written about Pondicherry, and mostly they are all French writers. Very few indigenous writer. I'm talking about fiction work. There are a lot of academic works that have been written by Franco-Pondicherrians, but very few fiction work, and even that fiction work only studied recently. And these, some of my friends who also write, they are totally invisible to the public for several reasons. But unfortunately, I got a certain amount of visibility, which allows me to come and talk about Pondicherry. So for 300 years, Pondicherry has been depicted as only through the colonial perspective in the white area. Very few works or stories has been written on the other side. So it means Pondicherry, other than the Fourth Boulevard, doesn't exist, because that Fourth Boulevard is a colonial city. After that colonial city, nothing exists. It's like as nobody is existing there. So for me to narrate Pondicherry through my literary work, it's important to go out of this Fourth Boulevard and to decolonialize this city itself. There is something else on the other side of the boulevard. So the Thinnai Kurchukupam is that fisherman village, which is just not even 500 meters from the boulevard, but it's a totally different world. You know, it's a totally different world. We eat totally different, something different. People are dressed in sort of different way. People speak in a different way. People have a different way of thinking. So, but those people were neglected for 300 years. So who is going to tell their story? So that's what I'm doing. So every time I write a story, I'm taking them outside the boulevard. It's my way again to decolonize the city, saying that no, there is no only this Fourth Boulevard, there is something else. So I always take people through the streets of Pondicherry. Actually, my next book I'm writing, it's again collection of short stories, which I call The Streets of Pondicherry, is how to tell the history of Pondicherry through the streets. As I said, different streets has different community, and why they are settled there, why this street is called this way, and why it has been named after that person. So people live in the street, they don't even know why that street is called after this person. So so the topographical perspective of the city is very important for me in order to understand the people, their way of living, and also their own history.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you so much. It's a really interesting observation that you've made over there about topography and about characters walking. It's always fascinated me because I grew up in a city, and the classic instance of being an urban dweller is about walking on the streets, the lanes, the busy intersections. That defines your experience of the city. Not so much vehicular travel, but when you're on your foot, and you have theorists like Michel de Certeau who talk about changing. It's a post-colonial theory, but what he talks about is the tactics that a citizen can deploy to just walk the city or not walk the city in certain ways, and therefore challenge authority, challenge the established paradigms of power. I mean, we had a wonderful lecture by John McCourt yesterday. He was talking about Joyce. But as we all know, Joyce's great novels, Ulysses, for example, we are celebrating 100 years of Ulysses this year. It's all about plenary. It's a kind of a kind of being an outrage in the face of the powers that be. That I will walk or not walk. I mean, we had the concept of the demode in the late 19th, early 20th century among certain French writers who revolted against the Haussmannian reforms in Paris, as we all know.
Exactly.
Certain of Paris being left out and then a new Paris coming into being. So they thought that we would journey back to those delimited spaces instead of living in the same city or staying with the powers that be. So I there's a wonderful mix of topophilia and topophobia in what you've just talked about, people being afraid of going beyond the boulevard and vice versa. I would come to Irina with the same question, the same set of questions actually, about this flip flop between topophilia and topophobia on the one hand, especially given experiences of writing about the city of Lviv, and especially in her poetry. So if you could read a poem or two and put everything in perspective, how that panned out, and how that experience of being a flaneur, of putting yourself in the position of a flaneur, how that made you arrive at ideas about emancipation and freedom, which is also there, I think, in your poetry.
Well, I do have something to add about topography. I would not call it phobia or philia. It's just a matter of fact, and it's also one of the effects of colonialism, as you mentioned a moment ago, that the streets have names which are not corresponding to our history, because Ukraine has been independent for more than 30 years now, and even now, when the war is going on, we still have this process going on, especially sharply right now, which we call the decommunization, because lots of cities and streets in Ukraine, they still had the communist names. They were named after communists from Soviet Union. They were even named after the people who were a part of the Soviet system and who were creating this artificial famine in 1932, 1933, and later in 1946, 1947, and people were not just aware of it fully. This process of decommunization is started actually with the Maidan revolution very fast. Because we became conscious that, okay, this is not ours, this is not Ukrainian, this name, this city. And they started with renaming the cities, giving the giving the old pre-Soviet names to the Ukrainian cities instead of Soviet names. And now the same is going on very actively with the streets. Even now, in the time of war, in the wartime, you could say that, okay, there are more important, more vital things to do than rename your streets in your city. But this is part of the war. This is part of this is a huge gesture to show you, okay, we don't need your liberation, as the Russians called it. We don't need it. We have our land, we have our streets. These are our streets, and we call them with the name of our heroes, with our writers. And many streets also named after Chekhov, after Dostoevsky, after Tolstoy. They are after Pushkin. They are changing their names. I just read this morning news about Uzhhorod. This is a city, the regional capital in the southern west of Ukraine. This region borders on Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania. Uniquely, like 3 countries, just one small region. And they said, officially, the officials said, okay, I think we don't need this monument of Pushkin because he has nothing to do with our region. and people are somehow, with the war and aggression, people become more conscious about what is theirs and what has been imposed, even what has been imposed generations ago. You know, it's like your eyesight is becoming more sharp to see what's yours and what's not yours. And it's not so easy to distinguish, because when you grow up, for example, in my hometown where I grew up in Western Ukraine, all my life, everybody around me were speaking only Ukrainian. I only learned Russian because it was on television all the time when I was growing up, and because I read. My mother told me, okay, but you know, the books should be read in original, and I also read in Russian, and that's how I learned. But it's a foreign language for me. It's not any, and it has nothing to do, you know, with my surrounding in which I grew up. But in my hometown, since I was born, there was a monument, which is a Soviet tank from the time of World War II. It's been there like a monument for, you know, since for decades. And when you grow up with something like this, which you see every day, which is part of your landscape, which surrounds you since you are a kid, you walk to school, you see this tank, Soviet tank there, it's just there, it's part of a landscape, it's like, you know, like a huge rock or something, and you are not aware of, you know, with history or why it's there and what does it mean. But now with this war, the people in my hometown, they started talking like, okay, but this is the Soviet tank. That means that this is the Russian tank. We don't need this kind of monuments there. And in another town, not far from mine, there was also a tank like this. And there were some activists who tried to draw the attention of the society. Hey, you know, this is anti-Ukrainian monument, which is in the heart of our town. Come on, we should get rid of it. But it was not understood. It was never performed. They only took it down 2 weeks ago, this Soviet tank, just to, you know, just to get rid of anything which is a part of the enemies, of the attackers, of the aggressors, power, you know, something like this. So when you are threatened, when your life is threatened, when there are bombs coming down your cities, you become very sensitive to these subjects. You know, this melange of what is yours and what was imposed through the colonial part. Actually, I think that the difference of the colonialisms that we are discussing today is that the narrative, or the narration of our case in Soviet Union and Ukraine and Russia is that the message was, we are brothers, we are brotherly nations. But this is a huge manipulation, and we were eating up this manipulation for way too long. We were like, we knew, okay, this is not Ukrainian because this is Russian, but we kind of accepted this melange for decades, and now this is the time of some kind of purification, if it's a good word, because this object, this parts of the culture of history imposed in the past, it has not rooted within Ukrainian society. You know, it did not. It hasn't grew inside of it. It was just there. We tolerated it. Okay, not to take our trouble to get rid of it. But now it's a very, even on the level of physical objects like this tank, it's becoming very. We become very sensitive to what is others, us, and what is not us. It's I think the identity of a Ukrainian citizen, be it of national minority origin or pure Ukrainian blood, it has become more stronger and more clean. I'm not afraid of this word, of everything that is oppressing.
That's a very interesting take on the cultural situation and how you see yourself as a as someone who has grown in that part of the world, grown up. I mean, I just like that the mention of the tank in the city, which you saw since your childhood, but you never realized that until now, as a reminder that this is a Russian tank or a Soviet tank. It's almost like having a Trojan horse in your city for all these years and not knowing it, and suddenly being brought to kind of realize that, well, this is already within our community. So uh, whether they have penetrated our borders or not, they're already here. I mean, history has left this thing as a reminder, which we have sometimes forgotten, perhaps. So that has been a wonderful session that we have had today in the presence of Ari and Irina. We have talked about so many things. We have covered different territories, different parts of the world. Uh, we have shared solidarity as only us writers can, because this is also, I take it as a platform where we have given each other strength, given each other support. We have come to certain realizations and we have articulated certain points of view and ideas that we have had. This is the best forum, I think. This is the best forum for building strength in the world. If more such exchanges between artists and writers could be fashioned, I think the world would indeed be a much better place, and we could make the difference that we would want to make through our art, through our words, through our paintings, through our artistic gestures. And as a final kind of to put the seal on this event, I promised that I would read this very short little poem with you for the audience as well. It's about Heathrow Airport. It's about me arriving at the Heathrow Airport. Uh, Computer can give me that second. Yes, I'll just read the poem. It's a very short one. Heathrow, estrangement, embarkation. The ground you walk on, like an absent foothold in the sky, is not responsive to footsteps. The more you walk, slowly round the gathering meaninglessness, the further you move away from the promises of entry into the nation's salt blood. The threshold thickens, and grounds vanish into space ruled by words that drew the sting of a reply, parried the bruise of a curse, a voiceless, multitudinous rim of someone's fear. Thank you so much, Ari GAUTIER, Irina VIKYRCHAK, for joining us at this international conference in Hyderabad. Wish you fair weather and a healthy artistic output in the days to come. We shall be in touch. Thank you again. Thank you, audience, for being with us on this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debashish.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Irina.
Debashish.
Have a nice day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.